I'm a firm believer that quilts are made to be used and loved, not hidden away in a closet gathering dust. Quilts were made to be washed. They're made to be repaired. They're made to collect memories, not dust. And these badges exist to help you do that on purpose. Welcome to the Quilt Scouts podcast. I'm Megan, your Quilt Scout leader and fellow adventurous quilter. This is a cozy campfire chat for quilters who crave creativity, community, and a gentle nudge to try something new. Each week, we'll talk about quilting and the small adventures that help us grow more confident, one stitch at a time. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get into it. I want to start this episode by saying something that might sound a little strange for a quilting podcast. So, some of the Quilt Scouts badges are confusing on purpose. Not because I want to make things hard or vague or quirky just for the sake of it, but because sometimes the things that stretch us creatively don't look like quilting at first glance, right? And today I want to talk about those badges, the adventurous ones, the ones that get you out of the sewing room, the ones that make people ask, wait, like, does this even count as quilting? Spoiler alert, yes, very much yes. Every time I share one of these badges, hiking for quilt photos, picnic on a quilt, stargaze on a quilt, I get at least one version of the same question. Is that really a quilting badge? And I get it. Like, I totally get it. If you're used to quilting, meaning rulers, rotary cutters, blocks, precision, these badges feel a little sideways. And here's the thing. Quilting has always been about more than the stitches. Quilts are made to be used. They're meant to be folded, wrinkled, carried, spread out, slept under, and sat on. They're meant to hold memories, not just points. And somewhere along the way, a lot of us learned that quilts are fragile, precious, off limits. So these badges exist to gently and lovingly push back against that idea. So we know not every quilt has the same job. I will be the first to admit some quilts are heirlooms. Some quilts are art. Some quilts are everyday companions. And the magic happens when you get to decide which is which. In our house, quilts are everywhere. They're thrown over the back of the couch. They're piled in my kid's bedroom, sometimes neatly, sometimes literally on the floor. There's almost always one in the car for those impromptu car naps that somehow always happen 5 minutes from home. And of course, we do have a few special quilts folded up and stored carefully in the hall closet. But most of them, they're out in the world doing their thing. My kid uses quilts to make forts in the living room, like full-on engineering projects with chairs and couch cushions and everything involved. And every time I see one of my quilts turned into a fort wall, I think, yeah, like this is it. This is what it's about. I still remember the first quilt I made that I stopped treating like it was breakable. The first one I threw in the car, the first one I let touch grass. It was uncomfortable at first because there's that little voice saying, well, like, what if something happens? But something did happen. I started enjoying my quilts even more. And that's really the heart of these adventurous badges, using quilts to create memories and not just display them. Okay, let's talk about hiking for quilt photos, because this badge is one of the very first ones I ever designed and ordered for the membership. Like early days Quilt Scouts, back when I was still figuring out what this whole badges for quilters thing would even look like. And this one felt like the perfect fit right away because it captures something I believe deep in my bones. Quilting doesn't have to live only in the sewing room. This badge is basically the intersection of two things: appreciating nature and the art of quilt photography. It is permission to take your quilt out into the world, into fresh air, wind, sunshine, trails, overlooks, so that you can capture your quilt in a way that feels alive. And before anyone panics, let me say this clearly. This badge is not about being outdoorsy. It's not about mileage. It's not about being a hiking person. This badge is about intention. It's about choosing a quilt and thinking, okay, what would actually feel doable to bring with me today? Because yes, part of earning this badge is choosing the right quilt for the hike. Size, weight, weather matter. And sometimes that means a small quilt. Sometimes it means a quilt that you're not emotionally attached to. Sometimes it means I'm not bringing my heirloom masterpiece into a muddy situation, and that is extremely valid. Then the second piece is planning your route. Nothing intense, just choosing a spot that's going to give you a really good backdrop. A place where nature is doing what nature does. Big sky, interesting trees, rocky texture, wildflowers, snow, tall grass, whatever beautiful looks like where you live. And then there's the practical part, because Quilt Scouts is always cute, but also real life. You dress for the weather, you pack what you need, water, layers, whatever keeps you comfy and safe. And then, this is the actual moment of the badge. You get outside, you take your quilt out, and you take photos of it against a breathtaking backdrop. That's it. And honestly, the first time I did it, I felt silly. Like I almost didn't. I was like, is this weird? Am I being weird? But once the quilt was out there, moving with the breeze, catching light differently than it ever does indoors, I saw it in a new way. The quilt wasn't fragile. It wasn't precious. It was part of the landscape for a second. And that's the magic of this badge. It really reminds you that quilts can hold beauty and adventure at the same time. Okay, let's talk about quilt photography, because this badge has a very special place in Quilt Scouts history. This was one of the very first badges I designed and ordered, and it was actually the first featured badge when we launched the Quilt Scouts membership back in May of 2024. And the thinking behind it was pretty simple. We were about to start going on all these quilting adventures, making quilts, using quilts, taking quilts places, and I kept thinking, okay, we should know how to take decent photos of them. Not perfect photos, not influencer photos, just honest, beautiful documentation. This badge is about learning how to use photography as a tool to help you really see your quilt. Because once you start paying attention to things like light, composition, and color, you start noticing details you might have missed before, like the texture of your quilting, how seams catch the light, how colors shift depending on where you are and what time of day it is. And one thing I love about this badge is that it encourages experimenting, both indoors and outdoors. Natural light, artificial light, different backgrounds, different angles. You start to realize that the same quilt can look completely different depending on how and where you photograph it. There's also a really important mindset baked into this badge, and I want to name it out loud. This is not about making your quilt look like something it isn't. Editing is part of the process, yes, but the goal is clarity, not distortion. You're enhancing detail, not changing the soul of the quilt. You're honoring the colors and the design choices you already made. And sometimes a quilt doesn't even feel finished until you document it. So while this badge teaches photography skills at its core, it's really about appreciation, about slowing down long enough to notice the beauty in your work before it heads off on its next adventure. Okay, so this next badge might be the most iconic quilt usage badge we have. Picnic on a quilt. So this is one of those ideas that feels almost too obvious until you realize how rarely we actually do it. One of my favorite memories is packing up a simple lunch and a bottle of lemonade and taking my kiddo to the park for just a mommy and son picnic date on a warm day. There was no big agenda, no fancy setup, just the two of us, a quilt, and some sunshine. And that quilt, it wasn't special in a precious way. It was special because it came with us. So that's really what this badge is about. Choosing a quilt that's easy to grab, easy to carry, and ready to be part of real life. Sometimes that means an existing quilt you already love. Sometimes it's a quilt you make specifically to be durable, something that can handle grass and crumbs and a little wear. And then there's the planning piece, which sounds official, but really just means where are we going, what are we eating, and who's coming with us. This badge gently nudges you to turn a regular meal into a small event, to let a quilt become the gathering space. Because once you spread a quilt out, something shifts. People sit longer, kids sprawl out, conversations slow down. It's magic. And yes, part of the badge is documenting the picnic with photos, but not in like a pose and smile way, more like capturing the evidence, the moment, the way the quilt held everyone. What I love most about this badge is that it doesn't ask you to improve anything. It doesn't ask you to finish a project or learn a new skill. It just asks you to show up, to sit down, and let your quilt do what it was made to do. And honestly, that might be the most important badge lesson of all. We've talked a lot on this podcast about choosing creativity over stress. And one place I actively try to remove drama from my life is dinner time. When I'm juggling work, quilting, family, and everything else, the last thing I want is to stare into the fridge and negotiate with myself about what's for dinner. That's why I love HelloFresh. HelloFresh takes the planning out of meals. Everything shows up ready to go with simple instructions, flexible options, and meals that actually fit real life. It's one less decision, one less stressor, and more energy saved for the things I actually want to be doing. And right now, you can get your first HelloFresh box free when you use the link in the show notes. Less drama, more time, more space for creativity. All right, back to quilts. Okay, stargaze on a quilt is one of my personal faves, and I need you to know this is coming from a place of full-on space nerd energy. I love space. I always have. A few years ago, my husband bought me a telescope for Christmas. I didn't ask for it, and I didn't even know I wanted one until I got one. And then I got one, and it was absolutely game over. Like, I nerded out hard. At one point, I was even a member of the Denver Astronomical Society, which feels like a really specific personality detail, but here we are. And stargazing has stuck with us as a family. My kid is officially a nerd in training. We'll pull out the telescope, set it up in the yard or campsite. We grab some snacks, we bundle up, and we bring a quilt along, Abby, to lie on or wrap up in while we look at the night sky. And that's really what this badge is about. It's about combining quilting and astronomy in a way that is practical, cozy, and genuinely fun. You don't need to be an expert. You don't even need a fancy telescope. You don't need to know every constellation. The badge gently encourages you to learn a little bit, maybe identify a few constellations, learn the stories behind them, notice patterns in the sky. It's curiosity-driven. It's not pressure-driven. You bring a quilt, either a small one you make or one you already have that's easy to transport, and you use it the way quilts want to be used, for warmth, comfort, and grounding. And then there's the documentation piece, which I love. Photos, sketches, notes, not to prove anything, just to remember what you saw. There's even a reflection built into this badge, thinking about how the quilt added comfort to the experience and how spending time under the stars might inspire future quilting projects. And can we just pause for a second to appreciate that this patch's glow in the dark? Because obviously it is, right? That detail alone feels like such a perfect metaphor for this badge. It's quiet. It's magical. It rewards slowing down. This badge isn't about doing more. It's about being still long enough to look up and letting your quilt be part of that moment. So when I look back at the quilts I've made, the ones that mean the most aren't always the most precise. They're the ones tied to a moment, a season, a place. They smell like campfire smoke for a while. They have grass stains that survived the wash. They've been washed and stain treated and washed again. I'm a firm believer that quilts are made to be used and loved, not hidden away in a closet gathering dust. Quilts were made to be washed. They're made to be repaired. They're made to collect memories, not dust. And these badges exist to help you do that on purpose. You don't have to earn every adventurous badge. You don't have to hike miles or camp under the stars, but I hope you pick one. One quilt. One small adventure, and let your quilt be part of your life, not just your sewing room. If you enjoyed this episode, I would love for you to follow or subscribe to the Quilt Scouts podcast so you don't miss future episodes. And if you have a minute, leaving a review is one of the best ways to help this podcast find other quilters who could use a little creativity and community too. You can find show notes and more from Quilt Scouts at quiltscouts.com. Until next time, happy Trail Scout.